Hey, this is Christian Buckley. We're doing a Microsoft Buzz Chat interview, and I'm here with Jussi. Jussi, hello.
Hey, how's everything?
Why don't you introduce yourself for folks that don't know you and where you are, what you do?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Jussi. I'm based in Helsinki, Finland. So Helsinki is the capital of Finland. We're next to Sweden and Russia, and we actively like each other, I would say, nowadays. And I joined Microsoft in December last year. And before that, I worked as an entrepreneur, running a Microsoft partner together with my co-founders for about 12 years.
Yeah, we should point that out, is that we had talked about back just before your transition there about doing an MVP Buzz Chat interview. And so you were an MVP and RD, more and more community people getting sucked up into the mothership. But
yeah.
So when you made that switch over there, so I mean, you're working with all the same people pretty much, aren't you?
Yeah, mostly. I was an MVP for, I think, 6 or 7 years. I really enjoyed those years. And out of those 6 years, I was an RD for 3 years as well. And after 3 years as an RD, 6 years as an MVP, and about 12 years running my own business, I stopped to think at some point that, is this what I want to do for the next 10 years? Or do I want to do something else? And I felt I'd seen the consulting business. I'd seen how building solutions for customers work. I'd seen the different challenges I would get when running a business. So I figured perhaps it's time to go back to see how Microsoft is today, because the company has changed quite a bit. And I joined Microsoft initially in 2006, and I left in early 2009.
Same for me.
Oh, really?
March 2006 till July 2009.
Okay. I was in Dublin, Ireland first. Then I relocated back to Finland, and after a couple of years then at Microsoft, then I had this urge that I want to build my own company. I want to see how running a business is. But then when you've been doing that for over a decade, once again you need a different kind of challenge, and that made it quite easy for me to apply to work back at Microsoft.
So what is your new role? What are you doing? What are you focused on a daily basis?
So I'm part of a team of 12 people in the Western Europe organization. So even though I'm based in Finland, most of my closest colleagues are outside Finland. And what I do, I'm a developer product marketing manager for Azure Developer Audiences. And what it in practice, it means that I try to reach and understand both the local communities as well as the Western European communities. I try to support them, be it events, be it meetups, be it first-party events that Microsoft is organizing, be it third-party events, so somebody else, perhaps a partner, organizing an event. So I try to be the voice of all things Azure developer, so both serving internally as well as externally.
So isn't that one of those roles that used to have the evangelist title, and Microsoft kind of cleaned house and got rid of the term? And I realize evangelist, I mean, has a lot of connotations, and
yeah.
So there was a move to kind of nix that company wide. You still have a few, I believe, that officially have a few roles inside of Microsoft still have evangelist associated, but they've largely gotten rid of the title. I don't know why they were focusing on that, but
I think the evangelism role in and itself was really good. And that was part of when we still had the DX organization,
right.
The developer experience.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. But at the same time, I would imagine it would be quite challenging approaching a customer or communities and say, I'm an evangelist. Right. People kind of feel, okay, so you're better than us, you know more than us. And it's not about that.
Just say yes.
Yes, of course. No, it's more about
now?
Yeah, it's more about understanding that what the pain points are, and it doesn't mean that I would be the super consultant who knows how to build everything, but perhaps being this sort of lightning rod to both hear the messages from the communities, from partners, from customers, as well as understand what's happening with Azure as a platform, and then relaying that message so that especially developers and IT pros would be inclined to listen to that one, as opposed to going purely with a marketing angle.
Right. Well, I've had conversations for a few years. I mean, I've had the chief evangelist title a couple different times, the ISVs that I worked for. I had conversations specifically different times with Dan Holm and Jeremy Thake that are both had evangelists in their title. Both are now inside of Microsoft about that role. And I think Jeremy and I, we were talking, I think it was at one of the SP TechCon, or not SP, SharePoint Fest Seattle events. We were talking about that role, and he even kind of said, like, look, we were talking about the differences between some of the folks that we knew that had the title. And there are, of course, some that were very marketing centric, some that were very much on the developer side of things. I always looked at it, the important part, regardless of your level of technical skill there, an important part of evangelism and the role that I saw was being that two-way conduit between customers and the engineering, the product team, and being able to represent both constituencies, speak the language of both constituencies. And so I looked at that working for ISVs as a huge part of that evangelism. Of course, sharing, hey, here's what we've done, have an understanding of the platform, be able to go out and communicate, look, I understand here the pains that you're experiencing, and here's what I can provide in that feedback to understand how there might still be gaps, here are questions. We may have felt that we filled them with the product. We're obviously not conveying that in the messaging, and take that back to the product team, the engineering team, the marketing teams, and communicate that, improve. And so that's what I looked at. So it's like quasi product marketing, project management, partner and customer management, business development, and evangelism kind of sits within that realm. And whether you pull the label evangelist off or not is irrelevant. That role, I think, is something that, especially in technology product-centric companies, it exists pretty broadly, just under a number of different titles, in my experience, what I've seen.
Yeah, I fully agree on that. And also it differs quite a bit on different markets. So if you go to Spain, I would imagine people are expecting perhaps something different than coming to the Nordics, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. So I like the fact that we don't have the evangelism in the title anymore. And I know that it's often hard to draw the line between marketing and technology. So I'm technical by heart. I love building solutions and stuff. But at the same time, I wanted to understand more what's developer relations, what's marketing, what's product marketing. And I feel the more you know about the technology, the more authentic you can also be when you start approaching those communities. Because then if you're saying, okay, this and this thing was just released and built, and somebody comes back to you and says, yeah, but there's this problem. It's important that you understand those, take that feedback and understand that where's that person coming from? What's the challenge in there? As opposed to saying, yeah, but here's yet another PR for you to read. Yeah, it's not helping me.
Right. I learned that lesson fairly early, back in the mid 90s. I was working for the phone company in California, and I was on a shared services team. And when I started as a new project manager, and I had the same experience where I was disseminating information that I really didn't understand and know. I was just going between these various tools that I was helping deploy. When I started to literally go over to the next pod of cubicles, over to the support team, and sit and listen on their support calls with the products that I was representing. For these, hundreds of internal customers serving, literally millions of customers around California, Nevada, Western US, and hearing like the real world application of that. And then I started running training classes. So essentially I was being trained on the product.
Yeah.
And once you know that, and you can even anticipate, like, as people start to try to vocalize their question, be like, oh, what you're experiencing is, and you start to recognize that and answer those questions. Yeah, that can only happen if you understand the products that you're working with. And that's, as you point out, that's usually a huge distinction with a lot of the marketecture and the marketing speak of people that don't understand the products or services that they're selling.
Yeah, and what I often feel is that when Microsoft announces something, I want to open Azure portal and try it out myself, or if it's something in Microsoft 365, I want to try it out first, so that I at least have a rough understanding of, okay, this is sort of what we announced. And then if I then reach to communities, if I sponsor an event, or if I meet with MVPs and artists, I like to have those discussions with them, as opposed to saying, well, I have no idea what we're talking about, but I did read about this online.
Right.
Yeah, not helping much, because in order to be part of those communities, you kind of have to contribute something for those communities as well. And that's probably the best lesson I learned when I became an MVP back in the day, because then you felt that in order to actually meet and get to know people, you also have to share and provide your knowledge for everybody else to benefit.
A great example is Project Cortex. And I mentioned this in a call this morning. It said the same thing again. Like, we're talking at a high level about something that the vast majority of people have not seen yet. We've read the blog post, we've read the same documentation. It has a very limited run for the beta, for the pilot that's out there. So there's maybe 36 companies in the world that are in there playing with it. I said, so I have a lot of questions based on not actually seeing the live product. And I'm sure once I get my hands on it and we can actually touch this thing, which is like summer, I think I heard like June.
I think it's summer this year. Yes.
Yeah. Before Ignite, we should start to see that. And so I think I'll be geared up for the Ignite online experience to start actually asking legitimate questions, having actually touched it, and hopefully with the MVP tenant and everything, being able to roll it out and play with it and kind of kick the tires. But that's, again, there were questions in our office hours this morning about the new Teams list, or the Lists app, and also the Tasks app. And I'm like, I've read all the same stuff. I've watched the glossy videos that everybody else has. And why are we sitting here trying to discuss the minutia of something that none of us have seen?
Exactly. And the same goes for Azure Synapse Analytics. And that was in public preview, but bits of that were in private preview. And they became publicly available for preview now as Azure Synapse Link last week at Build. And there's a lot of movement in that sense, that Microsoft is announcing new products, new extensions, and often they start with a private preview that a very limited number of companies have access to. And even if you might be an MVP, you might not have access to it. Or you might be a full-time employee at Microsoft and you might not have access to it. And that's probably also what excites me. Whenever I read about something coming out, I obviously see, is there something I can learn from here? And what would be the anticipation? What would be the asks that I would get from the community, from partners, from customers? Because by the time they start asking, I should know a bit more. And oftentimes nowadays, it feels that everybody gets the information at the same time. So it's not like when you join Microsoft that you get everything 6 months before and you're just waiting at home. Oh, I know so much about this. It's more about the MVPs, the companies in the private previews. They often get information fairly soon or fairly early. And then when the public learns about it, then I often get to read about that too.
Right. The one thing, so I realized that with these limited private previews, and Microsoft is working very closely because it's look, it's an alpha or a beta test of that. It's very early there. Microsoft is still learning. They're still building the product. So they're taking that feedback and building out the experiences. We then get, once it becomes generally available, we get the marketing pieces, and you get 2 or 3 of the providers, the customers that use those solutions that'll be part of that marketing push. I'd love to hear more from the people that participated and get more well-rounded feedback of those as those products go live. And that would even be great as the MVP to be able to do a call and have 5 or 6 of the customers that were on Project Cortex and talk about their experiences, what changed over their preview, the improvements that they've seen, the gaps that they still see. I wish that there was more open dialogue at that level. It's sometimes, I mean, this, and from being in the community too, how sometimes what comes out is just very canned, very controlled, which is great to have the new information. And Microsoft, it's not like they're doing something wrong by doing that. It's what every product company does in controlling that message. I just love to see a little more open dialogue from the people that have been in it. Anyway,
and I think in recent years, Microsoft has opened up quite a bit, because back in the day, let's say 10 years ago, it would always be that the next version of SharePoint is coming 2 years from now. And we would wait until 2 months before the release date to actually learn anything about what's going to be in it. And now it feels that when you open Azure portal or the Microsoft 365 portal, there's always something new. There's always a new icon or a
weekly
or two.
Weekly. There's something that's happening, right? Yeah.
So in that sense, I appreciate that Microsoft also as a company has shifted to this more modern approach in pushing these continuous updates out. And perhaps previously I would wait for new information, but now I have so much information that I just need to digest and ingest first that I feel I'm playing catch up every day, trying to figure out what's relevant, what's something I already know, what's something I don't need to know anything about, and what's something I need to know much more.
Well, that's a great question. I'd love to hear your response to, like, what do you do to stay on top of things? Where do you go? What are your go-to resources?
So the number one resource that I do use is obviously docs Microsoft.com. But how I use that, I don't go to docs Msft.com and start browsing it. I often select a product, a service, if you will. So for example, just today, I was looking at Azure Maps. It's something I haven't used myself. And I went to Azure Maps, and on the lower left corner, if you're in a desktop browser, there's a button called download as PDF. So I download that bit as PDF, and it gets me all the sub content from that level. And then I have a nice, neat PDF that's most recent data, and I push that to my Kindle. And I often step away from my home office, go to the living room, and the kids are already in bed. I open my Kindle and I flip through that content. Then I don't feel forced that I need to check the Facebook Messenger chats and Twitter and everything else. I can just focus on the content and figure, okay, this is what I need to know about this. And I'm not reading it from page 1 to page 500. I'm just flipping through, oh, this looks interesting. Oh, this doesn't. And that kind of gives me a quick understanding on stuff I don't know that much about yet before I actually decide if I want to build something on this. So that's one. The second thing that I use online learning resources. So one of those would be Pluralsight. The other one that I'm now starting to use is Learn TV. So that's an offering from Microsoft.
Oh,
and it's a free TV-like programming platform that has a schedule built into it. So if you go to docs.microsoft.com/learn/TV, you actually get a picture of a TV, and it says, okay, up next we have this content. So it's like a real TV channel as opposed to here's 2,000 videos, choose something, and we'll stream it for you.
So there's a channel guide or a TV guide that comes with that.
Yeah.
And tells you what's upcoming. That's
nice.
Yeah,
it's on the page. But besides all these resources, there's plenty of information you can dive into. I wouldn't perhaps say I spend a lot of time, but I would say I spend quality time to reflect and think every week, what should I learn? What should I study next? And in this sort of thinking, I try to figure, okay, so the summer is fast approaching. Microsoft fiscal year will change 1st of July. And we'll learn eventually what those goals and targets and KPIs are going to be. But for now, I'm looking at, okay, so perhaps in September, I should be learning more about this. And I have this inkling that perhaps this service or this offering, or this is something that customers and communities and MVPs would want, or they feel there's more value in this. So I built these small steps to sort of try to anticipate what the demand and what the asks of the future would be. And this often causes me to study something that nobody wants to know anything about. But then again, it supports my learning on something else in the future.
Right. Well, hey, who knows? You go and read that obscure side product service that's being worked on, and suddenly it becomes the hot thing, and as it expands, or, like there's always, it's interesting to go in, and I explore also the, just the Microsoft 365 blog, and reading through all those different articles, and there's case studies and things, and there tend to be little nuggets that come in little side, smaller, specific customer partner announcements. And then you'll hear about something, wait, what is that? And I'll do a little more digging into some main announcements. Because like, for example, the most recent one is kind of a roll-up of all of the announcements that came out of Build. And you can spend a day just searching through and reading, following the links from that one blog post. I think, was that a Spataro blog or anyway? But it's, it's probably the first question that I'm asked when I've done live events. So, when in-person events, I should say, one of the most common questions asked is, how do you keep up? How does anybody keep up? And the first thing I say is that I don't care who they are around the world, nobody keeps up anymore. There's just too much coming. And so you have to kind of pick your battles. So similar to you, as I find I'm in Edge, I use I don't know what it's called, where you could go and kind of build your little lists. So the Edge, the new Edge browser.
Collections?
Yeah, the collections.
Yeah.
So I started to use those collections and categorize based on the reading of the focus area. And I've built the collections and build a list there. And then as I go through and I follow up on stuff, and I just delete them out of there, or I take an action. Some things I just want to tweet out and share that information. Others that I might want to jot some notes down and build it into one note, and eventually build some content around that. But that's one way that I've kept organized.
Yeah, and I often find that there's a lot of noise, even if there's good announcements, good PR. It often might be that there's fairly limited amount of useful info for you. So there might be a lot of fluff around something, meaning well, of course. But at the same time, I figure what's the key takeaway for me, and it might be a tool, it might be a link, it might be a report, but that's mostly it. So I've learned to quite quickly discard the things I do not need. So I'm picking up on something, okay, this is useful, I will store this in here. Everything else I can just let go on this topic.
Yeah.
And once I've kind of learned to let go of those, it gives you this sense that you can still control and the amount of information you need to digest, as opposed to having always this nagging feeling that I should read more, I should do more of this, I should do more of that.
Now, having said that, sometimes, like I was thinking of a specific example, sometimes I'm glad that there's multiple, like I can't read enough about or hear about and from different perspectives. Here's an example of the new Lists app. And so Cashman Mark Cashman with Microsoft did a tech community post. that lists like a dozen, half a dozen, I don't know what it is. They have a lot of links to different things. There's the blog post, there's a roll up to the official announcement. There was some other content that was created specifically for Build. There's a video, there's a podcast recording, all about each of those different things. And so kind of to your point is like, look, it's largely overlap. They all are saying the same thing. There's likely a little nugget that's different in each one of those things, which is incredibly frustrating. But it's also, here, this is Microsoft speak. It's not a problem, Jussi. It's an opportunity for someone to go in and do a summary blog post that pulls the key information and provides it.
And that's also one of the things that forces me to learn. So if we have a Build or Ignite, I often write one blog post that recaps the announcements. That gives me the opportunity to quickly go through everything and then kind of mentally fiddle that, okay, this thing they mentioned and they gave it 5 minutes in the keynote is fairly small. But this thing they mentioned and they gave it 5 seconds, it feels quite large. So I need to look more into this one. So when you can mentally then place those items in your head, it gives you this sense of peaceful serenity, if you will, that you can lay back on your IKEA chair again and figure, okay, this and this thing I need to learn more about, but all these things they're hyping about so much, I already know enough when I have a quick look at this blog post.
Yeah. Well, that's actually, there's an article, and I believe it was in Wired years ago. There was a Microsoft employee, a gentleman who was in his like mid to late 70s, and he was, so the article was about how he was a researcher based in San Francisco and had video camera, like this was back, I think just prior to like the Google Glass era. So that was what, a decade ago, whenever that happened.
Roughly 2012, I think 2013, maybe.
So it was just before that when this article, and he was capturing all this information, was talking about how like every month it was more than a petabyte of information that he was capturing just from his life, and everything connected. And in the purpose of that was he's trying to better understand how the brain works and makes different connections by capturing all of this information, everything that he did all day long in his waking hours, save the time that he went and used the restroom, everything else recorded. But with all that captured, it's interesting to look at, and then how do you summarize that? How do you access that information? And the problem with knowledge management in general has long been not about the capturing of information. It's been easier. There's more edges, more information that we capture, but how it's contextually related, how that's pulled together, and then how you find things within that. A certain amount of be able to go into search to manually define that, how much is processed and sent to us based on our actions. I mean, that's what gets me so excited about what's happening with the graph and with the AI capabilities. And we're just scratching the surface still.
Yeah.
There was discussion, I know, around the MVP call, and there's some public announcements about stuff that's happening around search and improvements being made there, and team search and all that. And there's just still so much more room for improvement there. You think about that. If I could focus all of my time on capturing information that I think I might need, and that the system then is going and piecing together and serving up, like your list that you take off and read, in the quiet space of your living room to kind of parse through. If the AI could provide me with that list based on what I'm working on historically that I've read and been interested in and write. But that's another reason I share that backstory. I use blogging, I use writing as my way to go in and do that summarizing as I'm consuming it. Sometimes I will write about something and never think about it again and push it off. And years later, I save everything I've ever written. It's all in OneNote. I have an archive folder. It's all backed up. And so when I go and I'm researching on something, I'll start search in OneNote, and I'll often find stuff and I'm like, that's really good. Where did I quote that from? It's like, oh no, I wrote it. Like 8 years ago. Like, that's
Yeah.
really good. And if the link is still out there to the article that's posted out online, and I'll go and draw from that. But it's, yeah, I know I'm rambling a bit around that, but I think that the forcing yourself to go write about something is an important part of the learning process.
Yeah. And when you're learning, you don't have to decide upfront that this is the thing I'm about to learn. And I feel when you are brave enough to just go to your outside your comfort zone to actually learn about something, it often reveals something for you as well. Let me give you a super quick example. I was building a small solution for myself back at home, and I wanted to build this front end for this solution by using the Windows Universal Windows platform. Meaning, I wanted to build an app that I could possibly put on the Microsoft Store, the Windows Store.
Yep.
And it's been 5 years or something since I had a look at building a Win32 application, not a web application. So I was really hesitant to open the guidance at docsmicrosoft.com to figure out, okay, let's see what's going to happen here. But after spending 2 hours, I got everything up and running, and it's still running for me today, even after 1 day. And it was a stark reminder that once you're willing to let go of your fears and just go and see, with that expectation that you might not learn it, but at least you made a good effort and you learned perhaps something else. That, I often feel, gives you this sort of mental backbone that the next week you need to learn something more challenging. You can kind of lean back and say, okay, I did learn that thing last week, so I should be able to do this thing as well.
Well, you know, we are in writing. I mean, we are our own biggest critics. We often self-edit what we write, and where you hear from from expert writers, you hear from workshops on writing, creative writing, is they say don't self-edit. Just don't stop yourself. Have an idea, get it down, write it out, handwrite it out, type it out, whatever. But just get it out there. Editing is a later step. Don't edit in the moment. Get it out there. And I was listening to a podcast this weekend with one of my favorite authors is Orson Scott Card. So sci-fi, most people know. Ender's Game. Ender's Game is I love Worthing Saga and some of his other one-off stories. But he talked about that, how he said of all of the books that he's written, and he's working on the 20th book in the Enders series right now. But he says that he says there's not a single abstract and outline that he sent to the publisher at the beginning of the process that accurately defines the story that he delivers. He says, because as he's going through that writing process and is not limiting himself through the editing, he lets the story kind of unfold, which often breaks that initial outline, because as he goes through that process, he says, this other path is far more interesting than this structure that I thought initially. Yep. And that's how my learning is the same thing, where I set out to go down and do something like, I can't tell you how many technical trainings, online trainings that I've started on, and I get to a point and find out about something and I go take that other path and don't come back and finish that initial training. Call it my ADHD, that I focus on that. But I usually enjoy that type of learning, of following that path down that, because, hey, this path addresses a specific issue that I've experienced, or a customer issue that I've come across. And sometimes I find my way back to that mainstream view. But often those tangents which are more relevant, that's where I find myself. But
yeah, and I often have the feeling that I'm researching something, I need to learn something, I need to build something, or I need to prep for a webinar. I have 57 tabs open, and I'm not really sure what I'm searching at the moment. I kind of know that I'm missing on something. I need to get this and this connected. But always, give it 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks, you will find the solution, but you have to persist through those challenges. And this sort of mental fight in your head that you're going to fail on this, you cannot do this, or you're not clever enough to understand and digest this bit of information that somebody wrote for me. But once you push through those obstacles, and 2 days later you're looking at the content you produced, you figure, okay, I could do this.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a good method, is that it's always a good problem to have an abundance of information and resources in front of you. The hard part with going back to information management example, it's not about collecting information. How are you filtering that information? How are you getting through that? As you said, that about 50 plus tabs that are open. That's why the collections appeals so much to me, is because I get to the same point where I have Edge and Chrome browsers open and dozens of tabs open, and I'll go through and I'll say, what do I really need to do? And I'll sort and say, here are the things that I just want to add to my Hootsuite schedule to tweet out, to share out. Here's other things I want to do additional things with, and start adding that into the collections. And I can go back. It's just sorting. I've sorted piles,
Exactly. And the more info you have, the more you have to sort, and the more you kind of have to mentally juggle to figure what's relevant and what's not. I was reflecting this a bit a couple of weeks ago. My oldest son, he's 12 now, so he doesn't read physical books. He reads stuff online and whatever he gets from school. And he was trying to find something by using Google. So he would type in a keyword, press enter, get the results. And he saw that none of the results on the first page would give him anything. So he was like, okay, it's not there. I'm like, hold on, there's a second page. You can actually open the second, third, and fourth search page on different tabs, then arrange those side by side to kind of mentally compare what you have in there. And he was like, no, but normally it should be on the first or second. But if it's not, it's too easy to kind of let go and not persist through those small obstacles. And I think us who grew into IT by reading physical books, installing software on CD-ROMs, and waiting 3 years to get a hot fix for a problem, we kind of have this sort of mental attitude, if you will, that we're expecting it to be challenging,
right?
And we are used to opening the command prompt to work on those challenging issues. But when I look at my 12-year-old, if I tell him to open command prompt, he's like, why would I do that? There's no need for me to go there, because I can just use the mouse and click through my problems.
Yeah, well, that was the argument, I think, even when PowerShell was really starting to be pushed, and people saying, it's like, well, we're building these overly complex administrative user UX, the user experiences that where you said, what are the short keys, what are the hotkeys to get to some of these commands, and why can't I go in and build a simple script to go in and do this? And so I think that has been a revolutionary change for administrative capabilities. It's the mainstreaming of some of the scripting capabilities, and it's just incredibly powerful for a few short commands, and they make it so easy to go and find what those options, what those commands are anyway. And then, of course, the default, if you ever have a question about anything, any product, any real world hardware, any software solution, YouTube seems to have videos on all of it.
Yes, nowadays it seems to. And I'm probably, it's my background. When I grew up, we didn't have ready-made videos on every possible problem you would have.
No.
Now, if I'm researching something, I was researching some new audio gear to buy for my home office. The first 5 search results are YouTube videos. And instantly when I see those, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to click those because I want to read. I'm so used to reading to digest things. But now I'm shifting. I need to shift and understand that often the content is now the video. It's not just text anymore.
You know what I'm doing though is more and more on YouTube videos as I'm opening up the transcription. And so it's moving too slow, and I don't like the sped up voices. I'm reading ahead, following the flow of the conversation, and jumping down based on that the transcript. It's a nice little thing to go and do, to turn on, to get through and pinpoint exactly what you want within that video content.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I'll need to start use that as well.
Well, listen, I really appreciate your time today talking. If there's people want to find out more about you, get in touch with you, how can they reach you? When should they reach out to you?
Anytime, definitely. So to reach me on Twitter, so it's Jussi Roine, Roine, but I've got a short link that will make life easier for everybody, aka.ms/Jussi.
Wow, you got that.
It was still free.
That's nice. Yeah, it's like when my alias, when I left, there was somebody who was gunning for mine. My alias was C-Buck. I was so happy to be able to get C-Buck, and her name was Catherine Buck, and she's like, every company I've ever worked for, I've had C-Buck. I'm like, I was here first, and then I left, and she got it. She got it. So anyway, well, thanks a lot for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation, and maybe I'll see you this year. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm kind of already waiting to get back to those in-person events, but if that doesn't happen anytime soon, we always have digital events.
Of course. So, well, it's good talking to you, and we'll talk later.
Likewise.